Story 1. The White Dancer. The memory of that freezing December day in Nevada still sends shivers down my spine. Years later, I was driving solo across the state, surrounded by a desolate landscape. It had been snowing steadily for hours, but as twilight deepened into night, the weather took a turn for the worse. The snow became a thick, blinding curtain, piling up on the asphalt and forcing me to crawl along at a snail's pace. Out of the white void, a shape emerged ahead. It was standing dead center on the highway, motionless. At first, I convinced myself it was a hallucination caused by highway hypnosis. But as I inched closer, the figure solidified. It was a person, completely swallowed by the snow. I slammed on the brakes, sliding slightly before coming to a halt. I rolled down my window, the biting cold rushing in, and shouted, "Hey, what are you doing out here?" The figure slowly tilted its head up. My breath caught in my throat. He was wearing a glossy, featureless white plastic mask. Between the swirling white snow and that blank, pale face staring back at me, a primal fear took root in my stomach. What kind of person stands in the middle of a blizzard? Unnerved, I rolled the window up, intending to maneuver around him and leave this weird encounter behind. But then, he moved. He raised both hands in a sharp, commanding motion, signaling me to halt. He didn't speak. Instead, he began to dance. It wasn't the clumsy movement of a drunkard. It was fluid, precise, and hauntingly graceful, like a trained ballerina performing on a stage of ice. I sat there, paralyzed by confusion, watching this surreal performance for what felt like half a minute. The performance changed. He framed his hands like a camera lens, miming the action of taking a picture or filming. He pointed at me, then at himself. Was this a prank? Did he want me to record this for some twisted internet challenge? My mind raced through a dozen possibilities, none of them making sense. He decided I'd seen enough. But just as I shifted gears to speed away, a second figure materialized from the darkness of the roadside. He was walking briskly toward my car. Like the first, he was dressed entirely in white puffer jacket, white pants, and a matching white mask. He blended almost perfectly with the storm. Before my brain could process his arrival, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a handgun, leveling it directly at the dancing man. My initial thought was that this had to be a staged joke, but the metallic glint of the barrel shattered that illusion. Panic exploded in my chest. I stomped on the gas pedal, swerving violently to the left. The tires struggled for grip on the icy road, the car fishtailing dangerously, but my only instinct was survival. As I passed them, the gunman pivoted, tracking my vehicle with the weapon. I ducked instinctively, expecting glass to shatter. The adrenaline erased the next few miles from my memory. When I finally worked up the courage to check the rearview mirror, the scene playing out behind me was a nightmare. They were still there. The gunman had turned back to his partner. Bangan to gunshots were muffled by the wind, but unmistakable. I watched in horror as the dancing man crumpled to the ground. Then, the shooter whipped around, aiming the gun back at my retreating taillights. He started firing wildly into the dark. He drove until my hands were numb, putting miles between me and that scene before calling 911. When the police investigated, they found nothing. No blood, no casings, no footprints. It was as if the snow had erased them. The police concluded the shooting was faked, a theatrical performance for an audience of one. That night, safe in a hotel room, I couldn't stop shaking. I wrapped myself in blankets, sipping tea that I couldn't taste. The question that haunts me isn't what happened, but why? Why were they out there? Was it a prank gone wrong? Or was I the intended victim of a trap that I narrowly escaped? Story 2. The Phantom Bells. You have a story that has stuck with me for nearly a decade. I'm 20 years old now, a grown man who relies on logic, but what I experienced at age 11 defies all explanation. Growing up, I was the skeptical kid. I rolled my eyes at ghost stories and laughed at urban legends. But one specific night changed my worldview forever. He was sleeping in the family home, safe with my parents and grandmother nearby. It was deep into the night, roughly 1 a.m., when I was jolted awake by a sound. It wasn't a bang or a whisper. It was the distinct, rhythmic jingling of bells. immediately realized two things. I desperately needed to use the bathroom, and I was absolutely terrified. The sound paralyzed me. I pulled the duvet over my head, leaving only a small gap to breathe and listen. It sounded like someone was shaking a heavy set of sleigh bells, or maybe a large ring of keys. The jingling was continuous, aggressive, and relentless. It went on for nearly an hour. The most unsettling part wasn't the noise itself, but the reaction of my family, or lack thereof. My mother and grandmother were sleeping in the same room as me. The sound was loud enough to vibrate through the walls, yet they didn't stir. Their breathing remained deep and even. How could I be the only one hearing this cacophony? The noise seemed to be emanating from the balcony directly outside my bedroom window. That detail is what made it impossible. We lived on the second floor. The balcony had no stairs leading to the ground. It was just a concrete platform hanging over the street. To get there, you had to walk through the house and unlock the door from the inside. For an hour, I lay there, trapped by fear, listening to that impossible ringing. I tried to rationalize it, to force myself back to sleep, but the sound drilled into my brain. Eventually, exhaustion overtook fear, and I drifted into a restless sleep. Next morning, the sun was shining, and the world looked normal. I rushed to ask my parents, "Did you hear the bells last night?" They looked at me with confusion. "No," they said. "It was a quiet night." They dismissed it as a dream or the overactive imagination of a tired child. But I know what I heard. To this day, the memory unsettles me. Who or what was on that second-story balcony? Why were they ringing bells in the dead of winter at 1 a.m.? Was it a signal, a lure, to get me to open the door? I am just grateful my fear kept me in bed. I shuddered to think what I might have seen if I had pulled back the curtains and looked out into the dark. Story 3. The store that didn't exist. You make my living on the road as a long-haul trucker. 12-hour shifts are standard for me, often bleeding deep into the night. A few months ago, I was on one of these marathon drives, cruising down a lonely stretch of highway well past midnight. My audiobook droned on, but the heavy weight of exhaustion was pulling at my eyelids. I reached blindly into the passenger seat for a caffeine fix, but my hand met only empty aluminum cans. I needed an energy drink, and I needed it fast. He spotted a sign for a convenience store and pulled my rig off the main road. The place looked ancient, a dilapidated shack sitting in the middle of nowhere. The lighting inside bathed everything in an eerie, sickly red glow. A neon open sign buzzed angrily in the window, flickering on and off. He pushed the door open, triggering a rusty bell chime. The interior was just as bad as the exterior. The air was stale and still. The shelves were barren, holding only a few dust-covered cans and bags of chips that looked decades old. The roller grill, usually for hot dogs, was coated in a strange, unidentified red liquid. It felt like walking into a place that the world had forgotten. He scoured the few coolers for an energy drink, finding nothing. Suddenly, the distinct sound of metal on metal echoed behind me. Clank. He spun around. An elderly man was at the front door. He was threading a heavy chain through the handles and snapping a padlock shut. Panic surged instantly. "Hey, I'm still in here." Primera orden de man didn't flinch. He didn't even acknowledge my voice. He finished locking us in and then reached over and flipped the light switch. The store plunged into absolute darkness. Adrenaline kicked in. I sprinted toward him, grabbing his shoulder roughly. "Open the door," I yelled. He turned slowly to face him in the shadows. He opened his mouth as if to scream or speak, but no words came out, only a wet, gurgling noise. In the dim light from the street, I saw why. His tongue was mutilated short, jagged, and scar tissue heavy. It had been cut out. He shook him, half in anger, half in terror, demanding he unlock the chain. He just stood there, jaw working silently, eyes wide and vacant. A door to the back office creaked open. Heavy boots stomped on the floorboards. Two men emerged from the darkness. They were massive, towering figures, but it wasn't their size that made my blood run cold. It was their attire. They were wrapped entirely in silver duct tape, like makeshift mummies. In their hands, they held knives, but not standard blades. These were spiral-shaped, twisted spikes designed to inflict maximum damage. They muttered to each other in a language that sounded harsh and guttural, maybe Russian, maybe something else. Then, they looked at me and laughed. A low, menacing chuckle. You knew in that second that if I stayed, I was dead. The old man shuffled toward the counter, away from the door. I realized he had left the padlock unlocked on the chain. I didn't hesitate. I fumbled with the cold metal, yanked the chain free, and threw the door open. He burst out into the night air. I expected footsteps behind me, but they didn't chase. I glanced back. The two duct-tape giants stood in the doorway, motionless. The old man was now holding a dirty mop. One of the large men raised his hand, waving a candy bar at me in a mocking gesture, like you would lure a dog. He scrambled into my truck, locked the doors, and roared the engine to life. As I peeled out of the lot, I looked in the mirror. The store lights blinked out completely. He drove until I had signal and called the police. When the authorities investigated, they found the building abandoned. Dust everywhere. No merchandise. But in the back office, they found a bucket of industrial detergent and a desk that had been savagely carved up with spiral stab marks. They never found the men. I don't stop at lonely, run-down stores anymore. I'd rather fall asleep at the wheel than walk into a trap like that again.